There's another thing I always wanted to do ever since I was a kid. I remember when I saw my first airplane. I wasn't but about 5 years old. And I saw this airplane land in a pasture down where I live down in Texas. And I ran through a cotton field over there to see my first airplane. And from that day on, I always thought it'd be a wonderful thing if someday I could fly an airplane. And then I came to Alaska. I met a lawyer here named Stanley McCutcheon. Stanley McCutcheon was the Perry Mason of Alaska. He was known all over Alaska and was a good criminal lawyer. I got acquainted with Stanley McCutcheon just a little while after I came up here. Began to witness to him, and we became great friends. He had an old J3 out here sitting on Lake Hood. And then later he got a J5. And within a couple of years after I came up here, he called me one day and wanted to know if I'd like to go on an airplane trip with him. It was in the wintertime. And I said, yes, I would. I'd never been in a little airplane before. And I went out there and we fired that thing up. It was on skis. And we took off and went up to Nancy Lake, where he bought some link pelts from an Indian trapper. And when we took off from there, he said, you fly it. It was a tandem. In the front and in the back, you flew it with a stick. I said, I never have flown an airplane. He said, I'll show you and tell you what to do, which he did. And I flew the airplane over to Sucker Lake, where an old-timer, Tom Krause, lived by himself. Well, not totally by himself. He had his dog with him. Tom had built him a cabin out in the wilderness. Just lived out there, except during the fishing season. He had a fishing site down on Cook's Inlet. Came out, made the money to buy his winter supplies, and then flew back out there and spent the entire winter on his place in his cabin on Sucker Lake. When we came up to Sucker Lake, Stan said to me, now you landed. I said, I don't know how to land an airplane. He said, I'll show you. And you just do what I tell you. And I landed the airplane. He said, now take off. And I'll show you how to take it off. And I took the airplane off under his instructions. And I went around 3 times and landed 3 times. Took off and landed 3 times. Now that was my first experience flying an airplane, and it thrilled me all the way down to my stomach just to get to fly an airplane. Then there was another friend I had here named Joe Blackard. The first man I ever baptized in Alaska was Joe Blackard. He had a 170, Cessna 170, on wheels out here at Merrill Airfield, and he would take me up and show me how to fly that. And then Joe Blackard, some kind of a trade, got a little Aeronica Chief, a little 2-place airplane, side by side, with an 85 horsepower engine in it. He had his 170 and he preferred to fly it. And he gave me the key to that Aeronica Chief and said, you fly it when you can. There was another friend who came along about that time, and he had been an Air Force pilot out in the South Pacific during the war. His name was Gene Flowers. Gene Flowers was quite a pilot. He flew a P-38 out there, and when it was one of their reconnaissance pilots, went out ahead of the invasion and took pictures and tried to determine the extent of the fortifications of the islands that they were going to fly on. He was a super pilot. He took me around in that Aeronautica chief and gave me some instructions, and then went out one day and got out of the airplane, and he said, "You fly it." And I flew it by myself. That was my first solo flight that I ever had. Now, I had no formal instructions, of course, as you can see from any formal instructor. But Gene Flowers knew a formal instructor who was a friend of his, and he told him he had recorded and logged all of the time that he had given me, and I had logged all the time everybody else had given me, and he got this instructor, official instructor, to sign off in my book for him the hours of instruction that he had given me. So I then had that signed off, and in the earlier days there was a lot of pilots in Alaska who didn't have a pilot's license. They had just learned to fly out in the wilderness, so they flew out there. But the FAA began to gather these guys together, and they were insisting that those of us who didn't have an official pilot's license should make arrangements to get one. So I had my logbook signed off by an official instructor, and then I went down and took my written examination and a check flight with an FAA man, a certified FAA instructor, and I got my license to fly. And that was one of the dreams I had, which came true. And through the years, I've been flying around out here through the wilderness of Alaska, having a wonderful good time doing so. And that is some of the hard things that I've gone through. I've suffered a lot. I had this guy, Stanley McCutcheon, and Joe Blackard. They called me up one day and said, "You know that Taylor craft sitting out there by Sierra Motive Hangar?" I said, "Yeah, I know it. I've flown it. It did belong to Stanley McCutcheon." And they said to me, "It's yours." "Stanley," said I, "have transferred ownership of that aircraft to you." I went out, and there was my airplane sitting by the hangar on floats. I got somebody to put it in the water for me, and I took off with my airplane. It was a joy and a blessing and a privilege. And I tell people, yeah, I've suffered for Jesus a whole lot up in Alaska. Got some friends gave me an airplane once. Isn't that a terrible thing?